Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Kurt Thompson.
My friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Hey, Kurt.
Hey, Pep.
It is so good to be here with you today as we are stepping into the episode 2 of season 5. And those of you who haven't caught episode 1 yet, we are going through the book, The Soul of Shame by Dr. Kurt Thompson. We are going to be delving into chapter 1 today. If you listened last week, that means you went and got the book or got the book out that was already on your bookshelf and you've read the first chapter. So you are geared up and ready to go. So let's take it away, Kurt. What is our problem with shame?
Well, that problem that we have is, multidimensional. But one thing that we like to talk about, just to get started here, is this notion that when we're talking about shame, we're really talking about certain kinds of mechanics. They're like, it's the what that happens to us. It's the what that happens between us, both neurologically, neurobiologically, interpersonally, what happens to us. There's mechanics, but those are the mechanics of our stories. We're going to have an entire episode that's going to be committed to this notion of storytelling and what that means and how that's related to shame and how it is that shame embeds our stories and we live out our shame in the context of those stories. So our problem with shame has to do with the mechanics of our stories, how shame operates, but also in the context of how we are telling the story that we're telling. One way for us to think about this, and I don't write this explicitly in the book, but have recently come to think of it in this term, is that we always want to, and our listeners, to invite our listeners to be aware that what we are really trying to do is to draw our attention to how we are always moving from imagination to incarnation. From imagination to incarnation. This whole notion that we are made in God's image, we are image bearers, we are called to bear God's image, and we are called to restore God's image in the world. Those are the two clear callings that we have as human beings. That we are doing that first by, through the function of through our imagination. As we like to say, there's no intentional human behavior, whether it's walking across the floor or painting a painting or looking at Saturn through a telescope. There's none of that we do without first imagining it. I imagine it in some way. I'm anticipating it. I have an image in my mind. But that image then moves to incarnation. Now, when we use the word incarnation, we're really talking about the incarnation, the coming and appearance of Jesus in the world. This notion, though, that when we are becoming the body of Christ, we are also incarnating, we are embodying the image of God, and this becomes shame's playground. Shame wants to infect and invade our imaginations, and then allow that to express itself in our embodied action. This whole notion that God first has what I like to call the song of creation. This comes from the magician's nephew, right, in the series from the Narnia series, where Aslan sings Narnia into being. This notion that God sings creation into being in Genesis chapter 1, and God's word, let there be light, is this song, and there is then light. Light becomes a physical thing. It becomes this physical man, and he's giving it he's not just giving it existence, he's also giving it purpose and meaning. And so we move from word to world, and this is important to recognize that when it comes to shame, how many of us have words banging around in our head? I'm not enough.
I'm an idiot.
I'm an idiot. Right. All these things, these words that take up residence in our mind, and they over and over and over and over again, and we don't say them out loud until, of course, I'm overwhelmed by my own shame, and now I start to share it with other people, and I say, "You idiot," in my mind or out loud in some way, shape, or form. And so this is why I would say, we've heard the common phrase of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And what I want to assure our listeners to know is that shame is not that kind of a function. I want to assure you that what happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas. What happens in your mind, the shame that happens in the imagination, eventually it doesn't stay there. It eventually will become incarnate. It becomes this incarnated thing. The question is, in what way is that taking place? And so we move from the intrapersonal, what's taking place within me, to the interpersonal, what's taking place between you and me.
Mm-hmm.
And then how we start to share that in our community. We share it in our families. We share it generationally. And then we become violent communities of people. And we become violent toward anyone else who is other than us. This becomes in our ethnic divides, our political divides, all the ways in which we then use shame in such a way that, as I mentioned in our first episode, this notion that the news about shame is far worse than we know. The other thing that I think is important for us to recognize and acknowledge right out of the gate is that shame in and of itself, not good or bad, it is the way evil intentionally uses it. There is an intentionality with which evil wants to manipulate and use shame. We learn, and we'll talk more about this in detail as in future episodes, we learn that it's developmentally primal, right? It starts early and often in our developmental years. And in the same way, in the biblical narrative, it's out of the gate very quickly. We only get 2 chapters in before all the wheels start to come off. It doesn't happen somewhere in the middle of the Bible. It happens early on, in the same way that it happens early on neurally and interpersonally for us as human beings. And so with that in mind, it's probably worth beginning to talk in a little more detail about, like, well, what is this thing that we're actually talking about? And people will sometimes say, well, Kurt, what's the definition of shame? And I usually will say it's less of having a definition, like here's the definition of shame, and it's more a description, more an awareness of us being attuned and being observant to what it is that actually happens. And over the course of our this season, we're going to be weaving back and forth between mechanics and the stories in which those mechanics are embedded. And so we might say at first glance that, we all, in some respects, nobody needs to listen to this podcast to know what shame is. We all kind of know what that is. We have this sense of this. And there is, we say that it begins, it's an undercurrent of perceptions and sensation. First, we sense things, literally, with our bodies, and we perceive what that is. And we eventually attach words and meaning and behavior to those things that we first sense and perceive. Some of those words might be, I'm bad, or I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me, or like, I'm just an idiot.
Right. Which I find myself calling myself that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier, literally to the point that there's times where, I'll say it out loud, such an idiot. And what that does to you, I think about walking around with that.
Yeah.
Why am I walking around with that? And then I need people like you and Amy and, my wife to say, that's not true. That's not what you are. That's, and it takes, then you look away from it and there it is again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we would say, that, this thing that begins, it does begin in the body, right? It is a sensation that we have. Mm-hmm. We feel it. It's not a thing that I think about it as a concept and then I feel it.
Right.
Right. The words that say, I'm such an idiot, like they are preceded by something that's happening to us. And they do represent some kind of meaning that we then are giving to it. And that some form of this, like I'm an idiot or I'm inadequate, I don't have what it takes.
Right.
And sometimes it can even be attached to other emotion. right? Because this whole notion that I am not enough, I am inadequate to life, to life's demands, but not inadequate even in a neutral way, right? I could say, well, I'm inadequate to fly a 737. Like I can't do, but I don't have the expectation that I should be able to fly a 737,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right? But I'm inadequate to change a toilet seat. It's a toilet seat. It's not a 737. I'm inadequate to lead a nonprofit. I'm inadequate to be a husband. I'm inadequate in this moment to be the right kind of father. I'm inadequate to be the right kind of friend. I'm like all the things, all the ways in which we have this kind of a sense. And so even to the point where it gets attached to other emotions. This like for instance, our grief. Like when we're soon I was saying earlier, like Phyllis and I have two very close friends who are soon going to be leaving the area. People who are some of our closest friends in the world are leaving Virginia and they're moving to Africa. Byron and Kristen are leaving for Africa, where they're both going to take on new positions at a school and in a community there in Uganda. And the felt sense of grief, of sadness is undeniable. But underneath that, behind that, is the sense of like, what am I going to do? I don't have what it takes. I'm not enough to tolerate their departure. Sadness isn't the only thing that's in play. And so shame often also will want to wrap itself around all kinds of other noxious, unpleasant emotional states, so that evil can get its foot into the door every way and any way that it can. And it will tend to want to, as we like to say, it doubles back and doubles down. Allison, I've told this story before, but we've had other people have this sense that Allison growing up, she was the young girl who brought her 92% to her mom, who's asking, like, where's the other 8%? Now, Allison was so proud of this test. Like she'd never gotten, this is the best score that she'd ever gotten, a 92%. Where's the other 8% on your score? And so Allison then has to double down on working harder. And of course, the whole time she's doubling down, she's worried about where's the other 8%? And Allison will be 40 years old and a mother of 3 and so forth and so on. And she's still worrying about where the other 8% is.
Yeah.
Even when everybody around her says, like, I can't believe how much you do. I can't, look at the mother you are, look at the wife you are, look at the social worker that you are, look all the things. And Allison's thinking, where the heck's the other 8%? Or this story of, Matt's story, like that he's this. You want to tell about that?
Well, no, I related to Matt's story. He's this successful guy that owns a business and comes to you because he's experiencing anxiety, and the anxiety is built around the business. That he's afraid that the economy is going to turn or something. He has these employees that are depending on him, and he thinks he's coming to you for anxiety to help handle the anxiety. And there's just this underlying feeling that he has that I'm not enough, that he's an imposter, that he's not going to be able to be the leader that he needs to be, even though he's lived through downturns. He's done, he's proved himself time and time again. And yet he still feels like I'm not enough. I'm not enough. Mm-hmm. And is having enough anxiety about it that his wife, tells him, you gotta start dealing with this somehow. So he comes to you, and I'll let you take the story from there. But I will say that I identified with this story a little too much. I was kind of wishing it wasn't in the chapter.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I do too. Like I'm looking around at, we have this private practice, and it has, I think it's been helpful over the years in our community. And I'm really pleased and honored and humbled by what we've been able to do. And, there's always the part of me that's worrying about, well, have I done enough? Have we done Have we done well enough by enough people? And, you can I had a mentor when I was early out of residency who said it's important to know, Kurt, no psychiatrist is good enough to treat every patient. And this is a guy who is 15 years ahead of me and seasoned and really good at, I mean, just really effective as a psychiatrist. And to have this mentor of mine say this, like it was like somebody lifting an anvil off of my chest. No psychiatrist is good enough to treat everybody. And I have made a practice of telling that to all the clinicians who've ever worked for me. Like, you're actually not good enough, and that I want you to know that as as an item of freedom, as an item of liberation. That there are some people for whom it'll be somebody else to take care of them. And so here I tell patients, and it doesn't matter. 2 weeks ago I'm sitting with a patient who's like upset with me about something that I had done, and I'm like, how's this possible? I've been doing this for 30 years. I shouldn't be having this experience. I should somehow have seen this coming. I should have done this. I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
I can't take my own advice. So Matt is a story for me to contend with.
Yeah.
As well. Matt's story, and so this sense that like with both Allison and Matt, this notion that shame becomes part of their story and it doubles back, right? It comes back around. I feel bad, and then I feel bad for feeling bad.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it doubles down. It just strengthens its grip on us interpersonally and neurobiologically. One of the first things that we see, one of the first features of shame that we see, is this sense of condemnation, this sense of judgment, the spirit of judgment with which. So when you say I'm just such an idiot.
Right.
I think to myself, okay, right now when you say this to me, I'm like, Pepper, I don't know where that part of you is, but I'm gonna come find it, and I want to say well, I was raised as a Quaker, so I'm just gonna have words with it, right? But if I were a Presbyterian, I'd come with a knife. Right, and at the same time, there is the part of you want to say, well, wait a minute, wait. What's the part of the story that we'll get to in other episodes? What's the part of the story whereby which this part of you, what's the purpose that it's serving, right? But still, I feel protective of you because you're one of my closest friends, and I this sense of idiot, I don't know, no. This judgment that we have, Will was, another businessman who he had people who wanted to come to work for him, and he couldn't understand why he was having such a high turnover rate. And, his way of trying to help his employees is to offer constructive criticism. But what Will isn't recognizing is that what he is intending to do is being delivered in his embodied way, in his words, in his tone, and so forth and so on. It's being delivered in such a way that he's basically committing micro acts of violence. Now, he doesn't know this. He's like, I'm trying to help them. Just like Allison's mother, I'm trying to help her with her other, helping to find the other 8%. And this sense of, we have experiences of our parents or our employees or our pastors or whoever acting out of their own shame, acting out of their own distress, wanting to do well-intended things. But in the process, our shame attendant, who we'll introduce ourselves to in just a little bit, in a later episode, our shame attendant grabs the microphone and in some way, shape, or form is saying to Allison, saying to Matt, saying to Will, as Will then delivers the message to his employees, you're an idiot. And so we like to say that it is shamed people who shame people. We offer our condemnation, this whole notion of, judge not lest ye be judged. We're judging all the time, and my likeliness, the likelihood of my judging somebody else is coming out of my largesse. It's coming out of the um, extra part of me that has more than enough shame, and so I just want to share some with you.
You had a drop the mic moment, I thought, in the book when you said judging others has its origin in self-judgment.
Hmm.
I read that. I was like, yeah. And when you say shame people.
Yeah.
I'll tell a story quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. No. No, it's good.
I was eighth grade, thinking the seventh, eighth grade. And so I know you were a September kid, September 12th.
Yeah.
Well, you might remember that I am a September, you wouldn't remember, but that's okay. I am a September
Look,
kid.
I know that on the day that I forgot your birthday, you got a great haircut. I know that. I know that you had a great haircut, which is helping you maintain your status as the most beautiful man in the world.
Yes, thank you for that.
Let
me tell my story. So I was a September kid, so my parents had a choice when I was going into first grade to either send me or not.
Yeah.
And my cousins were all going, my friends in the neighborhood were all going, and my parents were probably time to get this kid out of the house anyway.
And you're so smart.
Yeah. So
I don't want you languishing with the
right.
kids coming behind you.
So all this to say, I was a little guy.
Yeah, I get it.
I was a year younger than pretty much everybody else in the class, and I was a late bloomer. Like I didn't grow until like my senior year in high school. Like if you had lined the kids up in the class from tallest to shortest, I would have been way down here on the short side. And so anyway, I used to play basketball in a league that was outside of the school. So I really wanted to try play on the school team in eighth grade.
Yeah.
So I go and I get on the team. They had tryouts, but I think everybody made it. It wasn't so I'm on a team, but I'm not playing much. I'm sitting on the bench. And there was the coach's son was on the team, and he was a super athlete. As a matter of fact, he was playing a year up, but he was incredible. And we won every game of the season, undefeated. And then we go into a tournament, and we're playing the final game of the tournament. And this kid goes up for a layup, misses the layup, and his dad calls timeout, calls him over to the bench, and slaps him across the face in front of a full crowd of parents and spectators for the big final game. I mean, the hush that came over the place. I mean, this was 1978 or 9 or something, so times were a little differently. There was nothing, so
oh my gosh,
we lose the game. Okay, we lose the game, but they had a trophy ceremony, and the trophy that we got for being the undefeated team for the whole season was huge, and we kind of got a picture by the trophy, and
like the season league champion kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I go over to touch the trophy, to see the trophy, and this kid slaps my hand, and he says, "You had nothing to do with this. You rode the bench the whole season. You didn't win this."
Oh my gosh.
And in front of the whole, in front of all my peers, in front of all, the team and the team that we just lost to, you talk about shaming people, right? Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
In that whole sense of judgment, it's just like it's getting close to making me kind of like sick in my stomach just to hear this story. And were your parents there?
Not in that. I think my mom will be, hi Rom, my mom will be watching this, I'm sure, and she'll probably hear that story for the first time.
Wow. So I'm close to just being like sick at my stomach hearing this. Like, this is just awful. And, season 4, we talked about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that trauma is so overwhelmingly powerful has everything to do with this very issue, the way it wields shame in the way that it does. And I'm just really sorry. And I'm also aware that that whole notion of judgment is, I mean, like it's a poignant story of the immediate trickle down effect.
Mm.
How in the world is that? In what world is that ever even possible that a father would do that to his son? And at the same time, if I'm the father of a star athlete, I would want that athlete. I was just we talked in the last episode about hockey.
Yeah.
And I was reading an article about Wayne Gretzky,
the great one,
last night, and was told that, and it was said that before Gretzky, it was understood that hockey was largely about stopping one player on the opposing team. Each team would have their one or two players that were the stars, and those one or two players were the people who were like, they were going to get the puck, they were going to score, they were going to make, like, that's how and so teams will arrange their defenses around stopping Gordie Howe.
Right.
And Gretzky came on the scene, and through his life growing up and his conversations with his dad, and his dad, who I think that he had a pretty good relationship with in his coaching, what Gretzky brought to the table that had never been done before was the way Gretzky got all of his other teammates involved.
Yeah.
And Gretzky would say that the issue is not about what you do with the puck. The issue is how do you get to the open space on the ice where nobody is, because that's how you, and so getting his teammates to open spaces. And people and Gretzky was, perennially, like it was understood that, like, how's this guy do this? Because he's not very big. He only weighed 165 pounds when most hockey players are huge and they're fat. He was fast and agile, but he got his teammates involved. And then it would later be said that other teams were so like, we don't know what to do with the Oilers because we're not just facing one guy. We're facing 5 guys on the ice because Gretzky's pulling everybody in.
Yeah.
If you're the great one, what makes you really good is the way you bring everybody else along. And that would have been the role of that coach's son, to bring everybody along, right? Because what he doesn't know is that if you're not in practice, he doesn't have anybody to practice against, which helps him be better at what he's doing.
Right. But you can't give what you don't have, what you haven't been given.
Right. Right. No,
it's that's a generational thing, but yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm just mad.
I appreciate that.
That
makes me feel pretty good.
I'm just really mad.
Makes me feel pretty good. Yeah.
I don't want to just find the kid. I want to find the kid and yell at him. I want to find the dad and beat the living crap out of him. That's that's just not very. Again, the whole Quaker Presbyterian thing. I got to figure out which I want to be. So this whole notion of judgment is one of the big characteristics. Another characteristic of this is this notion of how, when shame happens to me, I want to hide. I want to turn away from you, turn away from myself. There was a story that we write about in the book about Gloria, and she had an abortion when she was a teenager, and she never told this to her husband. She got married for 30 years. And eventually her anxiety and her grief and her long-term undercurrent of depression kind of caught up with her, and she had never told anyone, not least her husband. And you might think, like, how is that possible? She's got this other life that seems to be flourishing, but she's this depressed all the time. And this is, we can feel so bad about certain things that we never tell. We have, come in, see all of my house, but there's this one room that I don't, and if I practice it enough of not letting anybody go there, not telling anybody about it, after a while, I even forget that the room is even there. And so that's the other thing that we get with shame. I want to hide. I'm not going to necessarily, when I feel it, I'm not going to turn toward you because it's too overwhelming, too unpleasant for that to happen. This notion that it's also a third feature of it. We talked earlier about it kind of doubles back and doubles down. It is what we call self-perpetuating.
Yeah.
I feel ashamed, and then I feel ashamed for feeling ashamed. Nancy and Mark were a couple that after their marriage, she revealed to him that she had this challenge with the disorder of eating. Like eating was challenging. And immediately he wanted her to get help, and she just wouldn't do it. And every time that something would happen and he would bring it to her attention, she would feel that much worse, and she would just waited forever and ever and ever to do something about it, because every time it happened, I would feel bad that it happened, and I'd feel bad that I'm not doing something about it, and the vice grip of shame just continued.
Yeah.
And then there's this notion of, we like to call, divide and conquer, what shame does to us. And in a future episode, we're going to talk about what shame actually does in the mind. And one of the first things that we know is that I become disconnected even within my mental functions. Different mental functions become disconnected from one another. This notion that there's a part of me, within me, that is ashamed, and so I cut it off from other parts of me. But in so doing, I often cut myself off from other parts of me. Nancy and Mark were siblings. And as we like to say in the business, that sibling rivalry actually isn't about siblings, it's about parents. And this was a case in Nancy and Mark's situation. This sense that they would come together at these family reunions, and Nancy's parents, Mark's parents, were always highlighting Mark and all the wonderful things that Mark was doing. And his sister was just kind of like, a period at the end of the sentence. And at one reunion, and this, for years, this goes on. And at one reunion, Mark's talking with his parents, with his parents about, what his son wanted to do with baseball. And so Nancy, in her interest to step into the conversation, she wanted to highlight her daughter's interest in starting to play lacrosse. And she mentions this, and her mom doesn't even respond, but merely comes back to Mark in the room and asks Mark what position his son likes to play. Now, our listeners are listening, and you're thinking that, Kurt, you got to be making this. No, you can't make this stuff up. Who does this? We do this. This is what we do. And the next thing you know, there's a plate that is being smashed and food flung and a wine glass broken because Nancy's had enough. And she gathers up her husband and her kids, and they leave. She doesn't clean up her mess. She's just done. And not surprisingly, a few days later, she gets a call from her mother, and her mother wants to know what she's going to do to fix this problem.
What Nancy's going to do to fix the problem.
Yeah, what she's going to do to fix the problem. You need to apologize to your brother. You need to you left the place in a mess. You're really? This really happened. Human beings really, really did this. This sense, though, that when we find ourselves this isolated, we have parts of us that are this isolated, this room in my house that I'm not going to look at some point, the toxic nature of what is being housed in that room is going to be unwilling to any further or any longer remain confined.
Right.
And when it shows up like a hurricane. And that's what happened to her. And so we get, and then it leads to these next acts of violence, right? It's food and plates and glasses and so forth and so on, which leads to the next act of violence. When her mother calls her and says what are you going to do to clean up this mess? And so we find that these features of judgment and hiding, and then the isolation and the disconnection that takes place within myself and between myself and others is something that even in our responses, we tend to reinforce all these things. And we come to find out that if we're going to do something about it, we have to recognize that it's going to require a lot of counterintuitive work on our part. I tell people my notion of shame is that it's kind of like emotional nausea. Like, who wants to be nauseous? Who for whatever reason? Like, no, I don't want to ever want that. Like, nobody likes to throw up, but the thing that we like about throwing up is it like, oh, it lets me know that like my nausea is going to go away.
Right.
But I don't really get that. So I don't really want that. And so this notion of moving towards shame, which is what we really want to do, rather than moving away from it, is important. We're going to be doing more and more of that. Jordan was a guy that grew up in a school that locally grew up in a school that, eventually, as after he, went through, matriculated through all the elementary, middle, and high school, he went off to college. But this school became like a blue ribbon school in our area, and this is a lot of AP courses, lots of right. And Jordan actually goes off, gets his graduate degree, comes back, and he's teaching in the same school where he graduated from. And he's noticing all these kids who are having all this pressure, all this worry about like, am I not just going to go to college of my choice? Am I going to go to Yale? Right? This is the thing. Are we gonna have this right thing? And so he decides he's gonna start to meet with kids. Like, he's an English teacher, and he's gonna meet with kids once a month. He's going to this coffee shop. He's like, come in, and we're just gonna talk about how you're doing. And in the course of all this, he starts to he says like, well, what's it like to be in school? And they start to talk about how much pressure they feel. And of course, these are kids who are all bright, articulate, and nobody wants to admit that they're feeling the kind of pressure that they feel. But what's so interesting is that as Jordan facilitates these conversations, they start to name their shame about even being ashamed that they're feeling this. Like, they're ashamed that they're even feeling this pressure. They like, I feel the pressure, but I shouldn't feel the pressure. And then I feel bad that I'm even all the things, right? Just doubling back and doubling down. But as Jordan invites them to actually name it, they start to come every month. They come. They say like, well, I just look forward to talking about this stuff. And they start to talk about how the coming to this coffee shop once a month is actually reducing their overall sense of distress and shame because they're not by themselves. They're not alone with this. And in this way, news eventually, they talk to their, they talk to their parents talk to their teachers talk to the school people. And before you know it, Jordan's called in by the principal, like, what's going on? Like, and he starts to talk to them, and they start to like make changes. Because he's actually inviting these kids to do the very counterintuitive thing that we're going to be doing here in this season. We're going to be turning toward our shame. And Jordan knows, and those kids know, and we know that we're not going to resolve our shame, but we're going to change our relationship with it. And we want to say this is what God has been doing from the beginning. In the very beginning, and we'll talk about this later, how God comes to Adam. Where are you? He's coming toward it. He's not running away from it. He doesn't say like, well, my creation project just went down the toilet. I'm just going to burn the whole thing to the ground. I'm not going back to find them, those idiots. He's not saying that. He's coming for them. And we would say that this all culminates in the gospel. This culminates in Good Friday. This culminates in Easter. This culminates in Pentecost. This culminates in what the Spirit is doing even now. And we want to say that even in the middle of hard things, we're recording this in late May, and, we've had real tragedy that's taken place in the last 3 weeks in our country. Yeah. In Buffalo, the shooting. Mm-hmm. And now in Uvalde, in Texas, 21 people killed. We have our politics, we have our ethnic conflicts, we have our church fractures, all acts of violence that all begin in this thing with this thing that we call shame. And if I'm not taking care of it in my kitchen, if I'm not first taking care of it in my imagination, it's going to run my incarnational expression of it. And we really want to become more like Jesus. We want to become like the incarnate one. And in so doing, we're going to do with shame the very thing that he did, which was turn toward it, go after it, to invite it into the room so that it can be healed and recommissioned, so that beauty and goodness can emerge.
Yeah. It's so interesting that the very thing, the shame, the thing that it wants you to not do is turn towards it and share it, expose it, because what it's like its effect on you is the thing is the thing that's stopping you from doing that. Like how it affects me is that I want to hide. I want to,
Right.
And yet you've got to turn and open up. It's just talk about, counterintuitive is right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been really great, Kurt. I'm looking forward to continuing to learn more about this, and I'm sort of looking forward to learning more about myself, sort of. But thank you for today. This was great. And
Yeah.
those of you who are watching on YouTube, Amy's going to be joining us now. So stick
Before we
around
go,
for
though,
that. Oh,
before we
yes,
go,
we
I
have
want
an
to talk.
application.
We have an application, and we've talked about some things today that can help us begin the process of moving shame from just an imagined thing into our being aware of how are we making it incarnate in our own lives. And so, the application that I would invite us to consider doing today is, first of all, doing some journaling work, doing some reflection and some writing work around what are some of the ways in which I use words, kind of like you were saying, I'm such an idiot, I'm not enough, this, that, oh, I shouldn't have. What are some ways that we use words to both express our shame, but also to reinforce it? So take some time and do some reflection and start to pay attention to that, because we're going to get to why that's important, just to begin to pay attention to that. I would also want to invite you to start to pay attention to when you sense it. Where and how in your physical body do you sense shame coming over you? Beginning to just simply pay attention to it. And then we've named some characteristics of shame, some general characteristics. There's a characteristic of judgment or condemnation, the characteristic of how we hide, both from ourselves and from others, the characteristic of how shame gets caught in this loop and we just reinforce it. I feel ashamed, and then I feel ashamed that I'm ashamed. And then we have this sense of how shame causes me to be cut off from, disconnected, and I isolate from myself and from others. Those four characteristics, judgment, hiding, self-perpetuation, and disconnection/isolation, we'd love to have you do some reflection and some writing work, making some lists about what are some ways in which I do all of those things. Again, this is in preparation for what we can eventually begin to do in terms of how we respond to those moments that we'll be talking more and more about in the episodes to come.
Great. Thank you for that, Kurt. Thank you. Be paying attention to those words that I'm saying this week, and look forward to working on that application. Thanks. Okay, now, those of you who are watching on YouTube, Amy's going to be joining us. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, please write a review, subscribe, rate us. It all helps. Love you, Kurt.
Love you, man.
See you next week.
Right on.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I think I'm a Presbyterian because I wouldn't have a lot of words for that, Dad, the basketball coach.
Oh
my gosh. And then the shamed people. I mean, shamed people, shame people, hurt people, right? It's like, oh my gosh, let's fill their buckets with something else.
Yeah.
But we've talked about that story before, and hearing it again felt afresh and anew. It was like,
right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I'm right there on the court.
Yeah.
Yeah. For both, for the kid, the boy, and for you, Pep. It's like when he said that to you, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
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 Did this episode stir up anything in you, or this chapter, Amy? I know it did. It obviously did for me. Just wondering if it did for you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I love this book. I love it. Yeah, the fact, I mean, the difference between, because I was making a list as we were recording, like shame is this, it turns you inside and away, and it's judgy and embarrassing rather than expansive and true. And like Kurt, that you said, we feel it first. And that is sometimes so scary for me because I think I'm going to be overwhelmed with the emotions.
Right. Right.
And I'm a part of a group where the rules are we put words to our thoughts and feelings, and it's like just saying it out loud. It brings such freedom. I mean, somebody has to hear it, but it's amazing. It's so like feeling it first and then noticing, is that true? Like Pep, when you say I'm such an idiot, it's like because it's not true. My stepdad used to put notes on the mirror for me, and this is going to make him sound like a great guy, but he put, and he put Post-it notes on the mirror that would say, "You can," for me. So I would go into the bathroom and see on the mirror Post-it notes that say, "You can," and "You're amazing." And I thought, okay, if those things are true, the truth isn't enough. Like for me to just say it out loud, it's not enough. We have to be able to combat it with something or say it to other people, and for them to say, you know what, it is, you're not an idiot, Pep. That's not my experience. And so we can't do this in a bubble.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this sense too in which, I mean, and we'll talk more about this as we go on, that, you know, Pep, if you would say that, like you've as you've reflected and revealed to us that you're having these thoughts that, you know, that go on in your mind, and I would hope that even as you're telling us those things, you would sense our response to that. And as it turns out, what we need the most to begin to ground us to have a different response to shame, we first need to sense other people's responses to our felt sense of shame. Like I feel the shame, and then I have the words, "You're such an idiot." The words are the verbal extension of this that's happening. But then hopefully you would sense, like literally sense in Amy and me and Nell and others, you would sense us sensing something very different. You would sense hopefully like our compassion and mercy and like puzzlement, and I mean all the things that would be a very, very different kind of message, a different embodied message to you, even before we used other words, even before we used words like, "Oh, that's not true," or "No, you're not that," or whatever, because you know, it's like, you know, we say, you know, just say no to drugs doesn't really help because the part of the brain that hears just say no to drugs, it has got nothing to do with the part of the brain that wants to do the drugs. And so consequently, like I'm going to need to sense something before I can begin to use words that are commensurate with "this is really hard and I'm okay," as opposed to "I'm an idiot." But it's going to be hard for me to force myself to feel something in my chest just by uttering words like "you can," "you're great." Like I don't feel great. You know, it's hard to shoehorn those words into my brain in such a way that changes the nature of how my body works. And so part of why we have to say these things is so that we can have the experience. We open the door and trot out our shame. And while that very door is open, those who are listening sneak in the door into the room. That's exactly what we're doing. We sneak into the door so that when shame tries to come back in, shame finds that it's got a welcome committee. It finds
and
that it
there's
has
less room for it, right?
Exactly. right? But if I don't name it, if I don't open the door and trot it out and bring it out, it continues to take up space and residence and do its work.
And it's hard to say those things because I think, okay, well, I'm going to say like Pep. Okay, I said to myself, I feel like an idiot, or I feel like I'm not enough. When I think, well, why would I say that? But it's like, what am I looking for? But I don't need to know what I'm looking for. It's a sharing of our experience. Does that make sense? And
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a sense in which, whatever it is that prompts me to say I'm an idiot, whatever it is that prompts me to think, my own eye roll in the privacy of my own mind about myself, there is something that is bubbling up that precedes that. There is the sense of like, oh, I did I hurt somebody's feelings, right there, or maybe I'm aware that I didn't do as well, and there's a certain sadness there's a certain longing for this. There are other things that are genuine and reasonable for me to name and to talk about and so forth, but shame so quickly entangles itself in all of those things,
Right.
that I don't get the opportunity to be able to say, I'm worried, or I'm longing to do a good job, and I am afraid that I didn't do something right.
We get stuck on the I'm stupid, I'm such an idiot. And then it just robs us of whatever was beneath that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Kurt, go Pep, because I have to look at what you said.
I was just going to say that there's a planter out in my front yard, and it's for whatever reason, it gets weeds in it like crazy, and it gets to the point where they grow in so much with the flowers and stuff that are in there that I just got to get rid of all of it. I just got to cut it all out because you can't get,
Can't pick it out.
You can't pick it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're about to say something?
Yeah. One of the things you said, Kurt, was what is the purpose that it's serving? Like when Pep said, I feel like such an idiot. And you've said that to me. We were talking about some other shame stuff. And it's like, then I thought, okay, what are the purposes? I can't even think of, but is it to hide what's below it?
Well, as we're going to talk about in coming episodes, what we're talking about right now, we're still kind of in the foothills of talking about mechanics, right? What actually happens? What is it? Kind of describing what our experience of shame is.
Am I jumping ahead?
No, you're not. No, you're not jumping ahead. Well, but if you were, you should be ashamed of that.
Yeah.
Thanks for.
Such an idiot.
Thanks for
your shame sandwich. He's serving you right now. A side of guilt and.
I prefer a love sandwich.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pepper's favorite thing. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. So, this notion that shame is ultimately a signal that tells me that I'm being separated from someone else. It's ultimately the signal of abandonment. It's ultimately the signal that you don't want anything more to do with me. Right? So so one of the things that we can do, if I say I'm an idiot, if Allison can say, where's the other 8%? Then Allison can work harder because really what she's looking for is to stay connected to her mom.
And that's how her mom just told her how to do it.
Right. And I'm afraid that if I don't work hard enough, at the end of the day, it's not just that I'm not going to have my 100%. It's that I'm not going to have my 100%, and therefore my mom's not going to love me. I'm losing my mom's love for me. And so if I keep telling myself, I got to work harder, my fear of abandonment, my fear of being left, that whole Genesis chapter 2:18, it's not good for the man to be alone. Shame works at that juncture all the time. That's where it's working. Everything that we could say about shame at some level is connected to some relationship that we're afraid we're losing, that gives us deep and connected meaning. Whether that relationship is in play right here and now, or whether what's happening now is a reflection of the residue of unfinished business I had with my dad or my mom who are no longer alive.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, evil is going to do its work, every opportunity that it has in every domain of our life that it has opportunity to do it in. Yeah. So whether it has to do with the current relationships or relationships with people that, that we used to have, whatever, again, watching for where that player is coming on the ice to stand next to the net, to poke the puck in the net.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not lost on me that Soul of Shame is SOS.
Yeah. Right on. And what's been really, really, really beautiful is that I'm aware of the number of times in which I've sent up a flare and the two of you have come. I'm just really grateful. We're not, the three of us are not talking theory here.
Yeah, no.
We're not messing around.
Yeah.
And I want that for our listeners. I want our listeners to have people to whom they can say, here are my SOS people.
Yeah. And keep sending up flares.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
All right, guys. Have a good week.
Love you.
Love you too.
Until next week.
This podcast is produced by Kurt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at BeingKnownPod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.